I didn't grow up calling it a slaughterhouse. No one did. It was just the pens. A low stretch of land behind the old settlement road, where the ground dipped toward the creek and never fully dried. Even in summer, the mud there stayed dark and heavy, holding prints longer than it should. That was where pigs were kept, too many of them, packed into wooden enclosures, patched and repatched with whatever boards were on hand. I was brought there the first time because I was useful, strong enough to carry, quiet enough to listen, young enough not to ask questions that slowed work. The man who ran the pens was called Harrow, though I don't know if that was his given name or something people started using once they stopped speaking it directly to him. He lived close, too close to the animals, in a narrow house that shared a fence line with the largest enclosure. You could smell the pigs before you saw them, a thick soreness that clung to the air and refused to leave your clothes. The work was efficient. That was what struck me first. No ceremony, no prayer, no hesitation. Harrow didn't rush, but he never paused either. Each movement led cleanly into the next, practice beyond thought. The animals reacted to him differently than they did to anyone else. They didn't scatter when he entered the pen. They didn't squeal until it was already too late. He knew where to stand. He knew where they should move. I remember noticing the absence of panic more than the blood. The pigs seemed to accept what was happening, pressing inward rather than outward, clustering close as if proximity offered protection. Harrow moved among them without being touched, his boots somehow avoiding the worst of the mud, his clothes never catching on the fencing. When it was done, the remains were dealt with quickly. Nothing lingered. Scraps were separated, washed down, carried away. What wasn't kept for curing was hauled back into the pens. That part unsettled me, not because of what it implied, but because of how natural it felt to everyone involved. No one commented. No one hesitated. Waste went back to the hogs. That was the cycle. By the end of the day, the ground looked almost clean again, trampled smooth as if the land itself preferred efficiency. The creek carried the rest away, its surface clouded briefly before settling back into slow, brown movement. I asked Harrow once how many pigs he kept. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the pen as if counting something else entirely. Enough, he said finally. That night, walking home, the smell followed me. Not the sharpness of fresh blood, but the deeper, sweeter rot that settles into wood and fabric over time. I washed until my hands burnt, but when I lay down to sleep, I could still feel it in my nose. I dreamed of chewing, not hunger, process, jaw working without thought, breaking down something that resisted at first and then didn't. When I woke, my mouth ached as if I'd been clenching my teeth all night. In the days that followed, people began mentioning small absences. A laborer who hadn't come back from the road, a drifter who'd slept near the creek and moved on without notice, a servant who'd stopped answering her name. Nothing alarming. Frontier settlements lose people all the time, but the pigs grew larger, not fatter, denser. Their bodies seemed heavier, their movements more deliberate. They watched more than they rooted, eyes following motion along the fence line. When Harrow approached, they parted without sound. I noticed something else too. He had stopped bringing feed, no sacks, no scraps carried in, yet the hogs were thriving. One evening, as the sun dropped low and the light turned the pens into long shadowed lanes, I saw Harrow standing at the fence, hands resting on the top rail, watching the animals eat. There was nothing in the trough. Still, they chewed. That was the first time it occurred to me, not as a fear, but as a realization, that whatever the pigs were consuming now didn't need to be seen, and whatever Harrow had learned down there by the creek He had learned it thoroughly, because from that point on, people stopped asking where things went. They just stopped going near the pens. The land around the pens changed before anyone admitted it. Paths people had walked for years began to drift, footsteps bending wide of the fence line without conscious decision. The grass nearest the enclosures grew darker, thicker, matted down in wide ovals where the hogs pressed their weight against the earth. Even the fence posts leaned inward, not from rot, but from something like persistent pressure. Harrow noticed. He always noticed. He reinforced the gates, replaced boards, tightened wire, but he never expanded the pens. No new space, no relief. The hogs remained crowded, breathing close, bodies packed together as if compression was part of the design. I was still working there, though fewer people were. Those who left never explained why. They just found other work farther from the creek, farther from the smell. I stayed because Harrow paid well and because I had begun to feel something close to responsibility, like leaving would mean abandoning a task already set in motion. That was my first mistake. The pigs had developed habits. They ate at the same times each day, regardless of whether anything was placed before them. They gathered in specific corners of the pens, heads lowered, jaws working slowly, rhythmically. If someone walked past while they fed, their eyes lifted in unison, tracking the movement, mouths never stopping. Sound behaved strangely there too. The squeals had faded almost entirely. In their place was a constant low grinding, a layered noise that felt less like animal activity and more like machinery running underground. At night, when the settlement quieted, that sound carried all the way to the road. People complained of dreams, not nightmares. Those were easier to dismiss. These were repetitive visions, mouths opening and closing in darkness, the sensation of being reduced piece by piece without pain, the feeling of being processed rather than attacked. Those who mentioned it laughed afterward, embarrassed by the specificity. No one connected it to the pens. Not out loud. I did. One afternoon, a boy wandered too close. He was the son of a washerwoman, small for his age, curious in the way children are when they've been warned too often. He climbed the fence before I could stop him, dropping into the outer enclosure where the younger hogs were kept. The pigs didn't rush him. They adjusted. They shifted their bodies to block the gate, closing ranks behind him. The boy stood still, suddenly aware of his size, his breathing quickening. I jumped the fence, shouting, waving my arms. Harrow didn't move. He watched. The hogs parted only when I reached the boy, opening a narrow channel that felt measured, intentional. As we passed through, I felt heat radiating from their bodies, dense and close, their breath wet against my legs. When we were out, the pigs resumed feeding. Harrow finally spoke. "They know what belongs here," he said. I demanded to know what that meant. He looked at me then, not angry, not defensive, just tired. "Everyone does," he replied. That night I followed him. I told myself it was curiosity, that I needed answers. He walked past his house and down toward the creek, carrying nothing in his hands. The path was worn deep, not by roots, not by boots, but by repeated dragging. Something heavy had been moved that way many times. At the water's edge, he stopped. He didn't look back. "You shouldn't be here," he said calmly. I froze, certain he could hear my breath. "The pigs don't like waste," he continued. "They like continuity." Then he stepped into the dark, and the creek swallowed the sound of his boots. When I returned to the pens alone, the hogs were awake, all of them, heads lifted, eyes fixed on me, and for the first time, I realized the chewing sound wasn't coming from their mouths alone. It was coming from the ground beneath them. The missing began to gather weight once names were attached to them. Before that, absence stayed abstract. People leave, people drift, but the moment a name is spoken twice, once in greeting, once in concern, it settles into the room like a physical thing. You can't step around it anymore. The first was Caleb Moore. He worked timber upriver and came down once a week to trade. He was known for his voice, deep, carrying, the kind that filled space even when he wasn't speaking much. The week he didn't arrive, someone joked he'd found better company elsewhere. The second week, the joke wasn't repeated. By the third, his name was spoken carefully. I heard it while standing near the pens, tightening a loose rail. Two men passed on the road behind me, voices low. When they said Caleb's name, the pigs reacted, not with noise, with attention. Every head lifted, every jaw stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, as if something had been completed. The chewing resumed only after the men walked on. I reported it to no one. I had already begun to understand the boundaries of speech in that place. Certain things survived only as long as they remained unshaped by language. Harrow had changed again. He no longer wore boots. His feet were bare, hardened, stained in a permanent dark. He moved with a rolling gait now, shoulders forward, head tilted slightly down. When he spoke, which was rare, his words came slower, spaced as if chosen from a limited supply. But his control over the pens had deepened. The hogs followed him, not closely, not eagerly, but in alignment. When he walked the perimeter, they adjusted their bodies to match his pace, a mass shifting as one. He never touched them anymore. Touching was unnecessary. I noticed marks on his arms, not wounds, indentations, as if pressure had been applied repeatedly in the same places over time. The skin there was thickened, calloused, patterned faintly like the hides of the animals he tended. The settlement elders called a meeting, not about the pens, about the disappearances. I attended, sitting near the back. Names were listed, locations last seen, timelines sketched and dismissed. Someone mentioned the creek, someone else suggested wolves. No one said pigs. When the meeting ended, an older woman approached me quietly. She had lived there longer than anyone. Her family settled before the road was properly cut. "Does he still hum?" she asked. I didn't answer fast enough. Her eyes narrowed, not with accusation, but recognition. "My father said the man before him hummed too," she continued. "Different tune, same place." Before I could ask what she meant, she pressed something into my hand. A small iron hook, worn smooth, the curve blunted by use. "For when you stop pretending," she said. That night, I dreamed again. This time I wasn't chewing. I was being sorted. Hands, not human, not animal, moved pieces of me aside, efficient, precise. There was no pain, no fear, just categorization, use and waste separated without malice. When I woke, the smell was stronger than ever, not rot, warmth, like breath. At dawn, the hogs were already feeding. The troughs were still empty, and beside the pens, half buried in the mud where the ground had been disturbed, I saw something pale catch the light. A hand, not gnawed, not broken, cleaned, as if prepared. The hand disappeared before anyone else saw it. I buried it myself, deeper than it had been before, pressing the mud down until the ground smoothed over like skin healing from a shallow cut. I told myself it was mercy. I told myself it was containment. But it really was, I wouldn't admit yet. After that, the smell stopped being confined to the pens. It drifted. At first, it followed the wind, arriving in faint waves that made people pause mid-conversation, brows furrowing as they tried to place it. It wasn't the sharpness of decay or the iron of blood. It was fuller than that, rounded, almost comforting in its familiarity. cooking fat. People scrubbed their kitchens, blamed old stores, blamed each other. No one blamed the creek. No one blamed Harrow. He rarely left the pens now. When he did, it was only at night, moving along the settlement's edge, following the same slow, circling route. Dogs refused to bark at him. They pressed themselves low instead, ears flat, eyes tracking his passage until he was gone. Children began to complain of hunger, not ordinary hunger, a specific craving they couldn't describe properly. Bread and meat left them unsatisfied. They wanted something thicker, something that stuck to the tongue and lingered. Mothers worried, fathers snapped at them to eat what they were given. The hogs were quieter. The grinding sound beneath the pens deepened, lowering in pitch until it felt like a vibration rather than noise. Standing too close made your teeth ache. The fence rails hummed faintly when touched. I tried to speak to Harrow. I found him sitting inside the largest pen, legs folded beneath him, surrounded by pigs pressed close enough that their hides touched his clothes. His hands rested on their backs, fingers sunk slightly into the flesh as if he were testing ripeness. He didn't look up when I approached. "They know you," he said. "That's why they let you stay." I demanded to know what he meant by let. He smiled then, not wide, not cruel, just small and tired. "You helping keep things moving," he said. "You put it back when it showed." The hand, he knew. "Nothing likes to be interrupted," he continued. "Not work, not eating, not land." I asked him what would happen if it was. He finally met my eyes. "Then it would get hungry," he replied. That evening, the first structure collapsed, not a house. A storage shed near the road, its beam weakened from within. It fell inward, folding like wet wood, contents vanishing beneath the weight. When people dug through the wreckage, they found no clear cause, no rot, no pests, just absence where material should have been. The ground there smelled like the pens. Harrow didn't attend the gathering that followed, neither did I, because by then I understood the shift that had occurred. The pens were no longer a place, they were a function, and the settlement had begun to participate. Disappearances used to have edges. Someone would be lost seen at a road bend, or near the creek, or heading into the trees. There was always a direction to point toward, a story to lean on. That ended. People began vanishing between moments, between one breath and the next, between turning away and turning back. A woman reached for a bowl and didn't finish the motion. A man stepped outside to check a noise and never crossed the threshold again. No signs of struggle, no blood, no tracks. Just gaps where people had been. The smell followed those gaps. It lingered in empty doorways, pooled in corners, soaked into floorboards. Families burned herbs, opened windows, scrubbed until their hands cracked. Nothing lifted it. Harrow was no longer seen. His house stood open, door hanging loose, interior stripped of anything soft. No bed, no chair cushions, no fabric untouched. The floor bore deep impressions as if something heavy had rested there for a long time before moving on. The pigs remained. They were larger now, not in mass but in presence. Standing near them felt like standing beside machinery left running too long. Their breathing came slow and synchronized, a collective intake and release that set the air moving. I went to the elders. I told them everything I had seen. They listened in silence, faces pale, hands folded too tightly. When I finished, the oldest among them spoke. "You should not have put it back," he said. They knew. Not fully, not in detail, but enough. This wasn't the first settlement built over ground that learned a purpose too well. This wasn't the first time pigs had been used to make problems disappear. The elders decided to act, not decisively, carefully. They would dismantle the pens at first light, kill the hogs, burn what remained, move the settlement if necessary. I didn't argue. I just watched the pens that night. The hogs were awake, bodies pressed together, eyes reflecting faint light though no fire burned nearby. The grinding beneath them had become a pulse, slow and steady, like a heartbeat too large for the body that held it. Just before dawn, something changed. The pigs began to move, not chaotically, not toward escape. They aligned. One by one, they turned their heads toward the settlement, snouts lifting, mouths opening in silent anticipation. From beneath the ground came a sound I hadn't heard before, not chewing, not grinding, breathing, deep, satisfied. And in that moment, I understood why no one was leaving anymore. There was nowhere left to go that wasn't already the part of the system. At first light, the elders came with tools, axes, hooks, torches wrapped in pitch-soaked cloth. They moved like men who believed intention alone could restore order. I stood apart, already aware that the moment of clean decisions had passed. The hogs did not react when the gates were opened. They did not rush. They stepped forward slowly, bodies brushing past one another with deliberate care, as if spacing mattered. Their eyes stayed fixed on the people, not in fear, not in aggression, but in recognition. The first axe fell. It struck wood, not flesh. The handle split down the grain as if the post had pushed back. The man holding it stumbled, staring at the broken haft in disbelief. When he looked up, the pigs were closer. The second attempt never landed. A hook swung toward the nearest animal and stopped midair, caught by nothing visible. The man's arm locked, muscles straining as if resistance had formed out of the air itself. He screamed when his shoulder dislocated, the sound short and sharp before cutting off entirely. He was gone, not dragged, not consumed, removed. The space where he had stood collapsed inward, soil and air folding together in a way that made my eyes water. The smell surged, thick enough to taste. Panic followed. Touches and torches were dropped. Orders were shouted and ignored. The men broke formation, scattered toward the road, toward the trees, toward anything that wasn't the pens. They didn't make it far. The ground between the pens and the settlement softened, turning pliable beneath their feet. Each step sank deeper than the last. Legs vanished to the knee, then the thigh. Screams stretched into wet, choking sounds as mouth filled with something warm and granular. The pigs watched. They did not advance. They didn't need to. From the center of the pens, the earth rose, not brushing, unfolding. A shape pressed upward from below, stretching the soil like skin drawn tight over muscle, and then Harrow emerged, not climbing, not standing, but being lifted as if the ground itself had decided where he belonged. He was changed. His limbs were thicker, joints softened and rounded. His neck had shortened, head angled forward unnaturally. His skin carried the same dark mottling as the hog's, patterned with pressure marks that never faded. He inhaled. The pigs responded immediately, lowering their heads, mouths opening in unison. The breathing beneath the ground synced to his own. "Cutting ends things," Harrow said, his voice layered now, carrying undertones that vibrated through my chest. "This feeds them." The men who remained tried to run. The land closed around them. I stood still. Harrow turned toward me. "You stayed," he said, approving. "You always understood continuity." Behind him, the pens dissolved, not collapsing, not breaking, but sinking. Their purpose no longer needed structure. Their settlement screamed. The system continued. And the cut failed. There was no boundary left to cross. The pens were gone by midday, not destroyed but absorbed. The ground where they had stood settled into a wide, dark plain, its surface faintly rippling as if something beneath it shifted position from time to time. The pigs wandered freely now, though wander isn't the right word. They followed invisible paths, stopping where the land seemed to instruct them. So did people. Those who survived the morning didn't speak much afterward. Words had become unreliable. Saying a thing didn't separate it from what it described anymore. Names dissolved quickly, replaced by functions: carrying, cleaning, feeding, watching. The settlement reorganized itself without instruction. Homes nearest the old pens emptied first, not abandoned, repurposed. Furniture was dragged outside and broken down. Floors were pulled up, basements were opened and widened. Everything soft was removed. The smell guided the work. It drifted toward places that needed to be hollowed out, thickening until people moved, thinning once the space compiled. No one questioned it. Questioning required distance, and distance no longer existed. Harold walked the settlement's edge. Each step he took left a shallow impression that didn't fade. The ground there hardened afterward, as if his weight had finalized something. The pigs followed him in loose formation, not close, not far, an escort rather than a herd. I tried to leave. I waited until dusk, when the fog rolled in from the creek and the world blurred at the edges. I packed nothing. I moved quietly, choosing paths that had once led away. The roads ended early, not blocked, completed. Where it should have continued, the earth rose gently, smooth and warm beneath my feet. The smell was strongest there, concentrated, humming faintly with that low vibration I'd come to recognize as satisfaction. I turned back. Harrow was waiting. "You can go," he said, "but you won't arrive anywhere unfinished." I asked him what he was now. He considered the question, head tilting, listening to something beneath us. "A keeper," he said finally. Same as before, just aligned. The pigs began to change, not rapidly, not visibly at first. Their bodies thickened further, features blurring, legs shortening slightly as if the land preferred a lower center of gravity. Their eyes dulled, not with sickness but with completion. They didn't need to see much more. That night, the first person volunteered. A man stepped forward, expression calm, breathing slow. He walked to the edge of the darkened plain and lay down. The ground accepted him without sound. No one cried out. We were past that. I understood then that the pig man was never meant to be singular. Harrow was only the first to finish the process. Hunger returned in a different form, not sharp, not urgent. It spread gradually, a dull internal pressure that had nothing to do with food. People ate less and worked more, not because they were ordered to, but because eating no longer satisfied the sensation growing inside them. It wasn't emptiness, it was direction. The settlement no longer marked days. Light and dark still passed, but time had lost its edges. Work happened when the land asked for it. Rest came only when movement slowed beneath the ground. The pigs, if that word still applied, had begun to integrate. Some slept half submerged in the dark plain, backs rising and falling with the earth's breathing. Others pressed themselves against structures, their bodies reshaping over time, flattening slightly, spreading weight across larger surfaces. Wood darkened where they touched it, stone warmed. Harrow spoke rarely now. When he did, it wasn't to individuals. His voice traveled through the ground, emerging where it was needed, a warning here, a correction there, always calm, always final. I felt the pull too, a sense of usefulness waiting to be fulfilled. My dreams shifted again, not of chewing or sorting, but of joining, of lying down and feeling resistance dissolve, pressure equalizing, becoming part of a larger mechanism that no longer required thought. I resisted, not out of bravery, out of delay. Someone had to remember what this place had been called before it finished becoming what it was now. Memory felt like friction, and friction still mattered, if only slightly. The land tested me. Spaces closed behind me when I walked. Floors softened, then hardened again once I passed. The smell followed me more closely than before, thickening when I paused, thinning when I moved with purpose. At the edge of the dark plain, I saw something new. Figures rising partway from the ground, human shapes incomplete, faces smoothed, limbs shortened or thickened, bodies paused mid-transition. They were not trapped, they were resting, waiting for the next adjustment. Harrow stood among them, hand resting on one broad back that had once been a shoulder. "They'll be better this way," he said, not looking at me. Less wasted motion. I asked him if anything would be left. He finally turned. "Function always leaves something," he said. "It leaves what fits." The pigs stirred. The breathing beneath us deepened, and for the first time since the pens disappeared, the ground opened on its own, wide, patient, expectant. I stepped back, but the pull did not lessen. I tried to anchor myself to specifics, names, shapes, sequences. I recited them silently as I moved through what remained of the settlement, clinging to the idea that precision could still create separation. But the environment no longer respected those distinctions. Objects lost their edges, rooms softened, corners rounded off over time as if sharp angles caused discomfort. The resistance I offered was small, but it mattered, at least to me. The land noticed. Pressure increased where I lingered. Surfaces warmed beneath my hands, responding like living tissue. The smell intensified when my thoughts drifted toward escape, eased slightly when I focused on observation instead. Arrow approached without sound. He was broader now, his outline no longer entirely human. His movements were slower, constrained by mass rather than age. Yet his eyes, those remained unchanged, alert, assessing. Keeper's eyes. "You are causing drag," he said gently. I asked him what would happen if I never compiled. He considered this. "Then you'll remain as you are," he replied. A reference point. The word settled heavily. I realized then that I had been allowed to stay not because I was useful, but because I was contrasting. My presence defined what had already been absorbed by existing outside it. The role was narrowing. The dark plain expanded outward, its surface creeping toward the road, toward the trees, toward the riverbank. The pigs followed its advance, bodies adjusting as needed, merging into structures, reinforcing what the ground claimed. Beyond the settlement, the forest reacted. Animals avoided the area entirely. Birds diverted their paths mid-flight. The trees nearest the plain leaned away, roots straining as if trying to pull free. Something beneath them answered. At dusk, Arrow stood beside me. "You can still leave," he said. I asked him where. He gestured vaguely, anywhere unfinished. I understood the cruelty in that kindness. To leave now would be to carry the function outward, to let the system seed itself elsewhere. The pigman wasn't bound to place anymore. It was a method. I stayed. That night, the breathing slowed, not weakened, completed. The land had reached the shape it wanted, and I was standing at its edge, the last irregularity. Morning arrived without light. The sky held its color, but nothing changed beneath it. No birds, no insects. Even the wind had learned to move around the settlement rather than through it. I woke standing. Sleep had become optional. Rest happened in increments. Awareness dimming and returning without the interruption of unconsciousness. I noted it with the same detachment I'd begun applying to everything else. The land had finished expanding. What lay beyond the dark plain was intact but altered. Fields left untouched yet subtly redirected. Roads bending around the area in long, gentle arcs. Anyone approaching would feel the need to detour without knowing why. Containment. Harrow brought me food, not meat, something thick and gray, warm, portioned carefully. I didn't ask what it was. When I ate, the hunger eased without satisfaction, like pressure being released rather than desire fulfilled. "You're still separate," he observed. I asked him if that was a problem. "For them," he said, "eventually." He gestured toward the plain, where forms rested half submerged, no longer changing rapidly. The pigs had stabilized into structures and masses that reinforced the ground's shape. Pens were unnecessary. Control was distributed. "What happens next?" I asked. Harold looked toward the horizon, listening. "Maintenance," he replied. The word carried weight. This was no longer about feeding or growth. It was about balance, preventing interruption, smoothing irregularities, correcting deviations before they became waste. He turned back to me. "That was always your strength," he said. "You noticed problems early." I felt the pull intensify, not downward, sideways, toward alignment rather than absorption. The land wasn't asking me to lie down. It was asking me to watch. I understood then what my role had become. I was the boundary, the thing that remained aware enough to identify excess, to recognize insufficiency, to decide what needed to be redirected into the system and what could be left alone for now. Harold placed a hand on my shoulder. The contact was heavy, grounding, final. "You'll do," he said. Behind us, the breathing continued, steady, regulated, complete, and for the first time, I felt something like relief. Then came slowly, not as a group, not with purpose, just the way people always do when a place still appears on maps longer after it stops belonging to the world around it. A hunter first. He crossed the tree line at dawn, rifle slung low, eyes scanning for tracks that vanished the moment he noticed them. He paused at the edge of the dark plain, frowning, nose wrinkling at the smell he couldn't place. I stepped into view. He startled, relief flashing across his face at the sight of another person. He asked the usual questions, directions, water, whether anyone else lived out here. I answered carefully. I told him the road ahead wasn't finished. He laughed, misunderstanding, and took another step forward. The ground softened, not enough to trap him, just enough to ward. He froze, eyes widening as he felt the change beneath his boots. I guided him back with my voice alone, steady and calm, describing a detour that would take him miles off course but nowhere near the settlement again. And he reached solid ground. He didn't thank me. He ran. The land accepted the correction. Others followed in months after. Surveyors, drifters, a pair of children who wandered farther than they should have. Each time I adjusted, redirecting, delaying, turning them away before the system noticed them too clearly. It wasn't mercy, it was efficiency. Harold watched from a distance, no longer intervening unless necessary. His presence had become diffuse, embedded in the ground, structures, the breathing itself. When he did appear, it was only to confirm what had already been decided. "You're learning restraint," he said once. I asked him what would happen when I failed. He didn't answer. The pigs, what remained of them, no longer resembled animals at all. They were part of the foundation now, mass distributed evenly, pressure balanced. They did not move unless adjustment was required. At night, I dreamed less. When I did dream, it was of measurements, tolerances, acceptable loss. The settlement had become invisible, not hidden, excluded, and I was the reason it stayed that way. Years passed, though I cannot mark them with certainty. The sun rose and fell, the seasons changed, but the settlement never truly aged. The earth beneath had carried the history, storing every adjustment, every omission, every body and object that had been absorbed into the system. It remembered because it had been taught. I am still here, not at the pens, not with the pigs, not even fully with Harold, but aligned enough to maintain continuity. My role is simple in principle, infinite in execution. Notice what threatens balance, guide it back, correct the deviations before they ripple outward. Everything else is absorbed, everything else is forgotten, or remembered only by the earth beneath the plane, which hums and breathes with patience. Occasionally I hear voices in the distance, surveyors, hunters, drifters. Sometimes they linger, curious, sensing the weight of the place. I do not speak unless necessary. I move only when required. Their lives are never ended, at least not quickly, but they are delayed, shifted, redirected, and in doing so, they serve the purpose of the place without knowing it. The pigs, or what they became, are part of this foundation. Their bodies, their habits, their presence, merged into the land itself. Nothing escapes, nothing is wasted. The system runs itself, but it requires a keeper. That is me. Harrow is gone now, or perhaps he has dissolved into the breathing mass itself. I never see him, though sometimes I feel the weight of his attention, like the push of wind against a closed window. It is enough to know he trusts the process. Visitors rarely return. Maps avoid the plane as if aware. Even I, moving along its edges, sometimes hesitate at the boundary. The smell lingers faintly, warm, dense, and oddly satisfying. It reminds me that everything is accounted for, every excess consumed, every gap filled, and so it continues. The pigman is not a singular figure. He is a method, a function embedded in land, reinforced by time, maintained by a keeper who remembers enough to keep it running. And I am that keeper. The earth exhales, the breathing continues, the settlement, hidden and complete, waits for nothing, asks for nothing, because everything has been fed. The line between man, pigs, and land had disappeared. Only the role remains. Everything else is gone.